Hello, so today we're going to be talking about the Luckin coffee scam that occurred in April of 2020, or it was at least found out during that period. It actually extended from the beginning of Luckin in January of 2018 all the way up to April of 2020, so around 2 years is the approximate period that this fraud occurred. So beginning off, Luckin Coffee was just a small chain, in 2018. They began operations and their direct competitor, Starbucks, which is also a major US chain, obviously. Everybody knows that Starbucks is a major player in the United States, but they don't really know the scope around the world. Obviously, they're in China, but they're also in pretty much every other country on the planet, except for a few, outliers who they weren't really able to break in. Just off the top of my head, Italy is one of the major markets that Starbucks was never actually able to break into directly. And when we apply that, the reasons why, in Italy, it was mainly just because of the sheer amount of local coffee chains that are in that country. And so whenever Starbucks moved in, they really couldn't compete with the quality compared to the price that Starbucks always charges their customers. And piggybacking off that, we moved to China, where Luckin was able to establish itself directly because of the fact that they were able to pretty much drop prices by over 50% compared to Starbucks. So Starbucks was averaging around $7 to $8, and then Luckin Coffee was operating at around $3 to $4. And how they were able to accomplish that, as well as how they were able to establish an extreme amount of growth, as from 2018 to the fraud, they had opened almost 2,000 to 3,000 stores within the country, is that they were able to pretty much do a direct order to their customer base. And what I mean by that is they had where you got the app, you order online, and then you walked into the store, and then that was it. There was no you communicating with anyone, saying hi, whatever, here's my order. No, that just went totally automated. It was completely 100% just you walk in and then walk out. No chatting or anything like that you would probably get into whenever you go into a Starbucks, perhaps. And so that was their major differentiator, was their online business. And piggybacking even off that was what led to the scam. The scam was directly because of them moving money around through discounts and coupons that they would give through the app. And what they were doing was establishing a whole bunch of different shell companies, giving that shell company a whole bunch of different, you've got a free coffee, or you've got a free whatever that the store was offering at the time, because of the fact that they claimed that these organizations, had established accounts, and so that they would be reoccurring customers in the future. And that's why they were getting, the one free coffee coupon. And so they did this over a whole bunch of different organizations that they themselves established, and they also did them individually with people that were close within Luckin, so high executives and COOs, and the CEO was actually able to just pretty much give away coupons. And what they did, to piggyback even off that and direct it towards the financials, is they would claim that these were actual sales, and that they would be a paying customer instead of, the buy one get a coffee free establishment. And that is why the massive misstatements that would come later became so massive, is because they were claiming that these were actual transactions that were occurring between these 300 supposed outside organizations, as well as different individuals they were just giving massive amounts of free coupons and buy one get one frees or whatever to these individuals, and they really weren't getting any revenue from these different entities. And so in total, it was around $310 million that they did this for, which they did directly to hike the stock price and keep the massive amount of growth rate that they were occurring during this time period going. And so that leads into the 2,000, 3,000 stores. Most organizations don't even reach perhaps maybe over 10 to 15 in a 2 to 3 year period, and they rose to almost 2,000 to 3,000. And they did that through the fraud, is what they basically happened, they were able to convince the markets once they were listed on the NASDAQ that they had massive amounts of sales coming in. And this organization called Mudwaters did an investigation where they went in and were checking different receipts, seeing how much each customer paid for an individual coffee, and then connected that to their actual sales numbers, averaging them out, and they just weren't connecting. There was no possible way for them to have the reported sales figures that they were describing to the markets, and it pretty much came out that, I mean, it was obviously completely fraudulent. And because of this, their stock price on the NASDAQ pretty much got delisted after it dropped 80% in one day. And then on top of that, their CEO and COO pretty much immediately got sacked. And then there was a reorganization period from within the organization to try to get this thing moving forward in any sort of direction, because they pretty much were under extreme scrutiny by the United States markets, where the NASDAQ is, and then they also were under the Chinese government, who had also established an investigation into the organization because of the faulty sales numbers from within their country. So what ended up happening is they paid a $180 million fee just to the NASDAQ, and then they had to go in and discuss a whole bunch of different concepts with the Chinese government to allow them to continue operating as they need in that country the government's blessing to even do business. So they had to convince them to even allow them to get out of bankruptcy because of the 80% drop in their market value, as well as the fraudulent sales numbers. Banks weren't letting them get any, future loans or anything like that to continue increasing the amount of stores and thus, hopefully increase revenue in the future. But eventually you got competent people in place, which allowed them to continually growing the organization, and it prevented the remaining 20% of value from completely going under and all the investors just completely, losing everything. And so what also continuously after that occurred was that the organization continued to grow massively. So after the April 2020 event occurred, they grew from the 3,000 to 4,000 that they had at that period in store numbers all the way to 36,000 in 2026. So now that it's over, they're actually bigger than Starbucks in every capacity. And they're actually pretty much kicking them out of the country slowly, as Starbucks still maintains their $4 to $8 or $7 to $8 range, and they're still at $4 and $3. So they've also expanded to the United States in New York, and they also have the same model of $4 to $5. I think because of the New York markets, it's massive, and so you have to account for the different sales tax. So they had to increase by $1, but it still beats out the $8 range. So they're currently expanding to different countries, and pretty much have weathered the fraud pretty much in every respect. And so that's pretty much how the fraud occurred, how it went, and what was the result of the organization coming out of bankruptcy directly. So thank you for your time and have a great day.